Hello. Welcome to the Cross Labs podcast On My Mind, where every week Cross Labs members and friends share a little bit about, well, what's on their minds. We're scientists and researchers who think deeply about what intelligence, life, technology are, but also what they could be. And with today's extremely fast rate of algorithm development, we certainly do have a lot on our minds. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the conversation. The topic was a little bit related to last week about communication between agents, but this one is specifically some very provocative idea: should language become obsolete? And I'm wondering how long it's going to be until they turn into something that's straight out of Star Trek. You don't have to learn any language. You can just talk to somebody and then their idea gets picked up by this device or piece of software or whatever. And that idea is instantly translated and spoken back to you in your language in real time. Yeah, there's a lot of benefits to learning a language, but will there be a point where it'll become obsolete?
In Spanish, we have a lot of stuff like accents, weird grammar rules, and it's a whole complicated mess to write it correctly. But then there is this one famous Colombian writer, even won a Nobel Literature Award. He totally believed that all those rules are just an obstacle for an idea to pass through. It's not because I'm lazy, but I totally agree with the guy. The whole concept of the thing, sometimes we get stuck into formalism that don't add anything to the concept that we're trying to communicate. And we kind of forget that language is just a tool to pass information A from subject 1 to subject 2. Whatever channel goes through it, if the idea A passed from 1 to 2, then we're fine. There is no problem there. If I didn't use the perfect grammar tense or whatever, it doesn't matter. I actually even believe that forfeiting your mother tongue is not a crazy idea. I might have an adaptation of my own language that I built because, well, I've been living in different countries that have different languages and I know concepts from each language that don't exist in the other. Best example I use is you cannot directly translate into Spanish clockwise. There is no word for that. You have to build a super long sentence. You have to say like, en el sentido de las manecillas del reloj. That is super long. So I actually believe that if you can construct your own arrangement of words and concepts into your own language, that would be really useful to pass information way more efficiently.
But that is still a language.
Oh, yeah.
So like forfeiting all language would be qualitatively different situation, because then you can't talk about translating things into your language or translating things from your language because you have no language. So you actually would have to be operating in a totally non-linguistic mode.
This often comes from translation, or because there's a word in a different language and then they want to translate it. I know the French also do that.
It can come from stubbornness, though. When I was in Montreal, I remember that people complained about the French word for email, because everywhere in the world people called it email, but in French it's courriel, I think. That was an intentional, politically motivated decision.
Yeah, that's the Académie Française who decide these things. I think there's something like similar situation as a Persian.
Oh, so French is now using the word email. Okay.
I mean, having just one language in the world, I always think the advantages surpass the disadvantages. But having no language, whether that's even possible, that's a much deeper question. Like, even if you have your own language, can you even think without a language, or does language improve your thinking in some way?
If we want to go to the far extent, you can use the translator stuff even like 8 years ago. When I first went to Japan, I was really relying on take a photo and translate a menu kind of functionality. And it's not perfect, but it works. But if we want to go very far, you could go another way. You say we actually just stop talking to people. Instead, we only act to customize our AI digital assistants or whatever, and just have them talk to each other or talk to people for us. So in that case, like that would be a scenario for the loss of language, where at the end of the day, you're losing language because you have no intent to actually communicate with other people directly, ever.
I don't think you're losing language. In my head, you're gaining language. Let's say that example of the clockwise in Spanish, right? And then you keep talking to your AI, whatever you want to call it. It can also feed you information. It can tell you, oh, right, that thing you're talking about is the concept of whatever word in whatever language, and you integrate it to your own data set of words, to call it in a way. So you now have these other concepts that you didn't have before. Because at least in my case, when I learned Japanese and I used the word domo, that thing you cannot translate to any other language. Like, I have no idea how to put it in words because it has so many uses, but you understand it in the context. And if you create your own arrangement of these weird words and concepts that enrich your personality and your thought process, then that's gonna at some point become something so complicated that it is your own language.
Yeah, but I guess I'm saying that stuff is all, in some sense, already happened, already old. Like, that's not a new future thing that AI lets people make. Like, patois is a thing, right? If you go to places that are fairly insular and have influence, usually colonial occupiers or things like that, then the language will tend to be a unique variant that incorporates words that are useful from all of the languages of everyone who's essentially held that island or been in charge in that place. People adopt terms from other languages. That's why we have cognates. Japanese has it. That's why you talk about having, ordering a kohi.
Katakana, yeah.
Yeah.
There's definitely like two different concepts going on. There's this idea of how quickly is it going to be feasible such that we can translate any concept from any language into any other language with some reasonable fidelity to the original thought or expression that's going to be translated. But then there's also this other idea that Martin brought up of, should we think about getting rid of languages altogether? But then that goes back into this idea of, do we think in languages? And I think it's interesting that so much of our brain is dedicated to speech generation and speech recognition and processing and things like that. But also, on the other hand, we're really only one generation away from losing all of our language capabilities, because it's not like people come up with their own language on their own. Language is something that's taught, and it's a behavioral thing that we program in ourselves as a culture. So is that something where we can get rid of and not necessarily lose any cognitive function? Or do we need language in order to actually process ideas internally?
I think you just lose cognitive function. Just removing it and not doing anything, you'd certainly be worse off. I take the original question of the conversation to be more like, are there prosthetics that we imagine making such that, despite the fact that this would be such a big loss if we were to just do it now, with those prosthetics, it would be a gain? I think without the prosthetics, it's like, yeah, that's just a loss.
It's this thing where we have some assistant or something, it probably reacts with our brains directly. And then the personal assistants communicate in some way or form. Maybe they use some encoding. They probably then still use language just for practical reasons.
Latent vectors are more direct for neural networks if you can access that and you have a guarantee that it's exactly the same brain on either side. I think it's very unlikely to be beneficial, even with the prosthetic. Even if I try to devil's advocate, it just seems like, why?
In a way, it seems that this whole language thing, it kind of creates some structure in the brain that's useful.
Yeah, not even necessarily a structure in the brain, but a procedure that we can follow. It's like these things with GPT where if you wanted to do math, you tell it, let's think step by step, show your work. And people laugh about it and how stupid is this that it can get the right answer if you tell it to think, and it gets the wrong answer if you don't tell it to think. But think about when you learn math as a kid, you're doing the same thing, right? Your teacher says, don't just write an answer on your sheet, you have to show your work. And it's like, why? This is the answer. If I have the right answer, that's all that matters, right? But the actual process of going through the algorithm and showing this extra stuff that has these internal error correcting codes, extra bits, and doing it in that kind of serial processing way basically means that even if our brains are not great at adding two big numbers together, that we can generalize and add two gigantic numbers together with a piece of paper. If we didn't have this thing that we could procedurally follow one step at a time and not have to hold the entire thing in our head, we would probably not be able to do that kind of math. We'd be doing fingers and toes.
I guess the question is, can you only do serial processing thing with language?
I don't think you do need a language. I think that there are a lot of tricks and heuristics and gimmicks and tools that people do where you are doing that with other physical things that hold your brain state. The reason why the speed of ships is measured in knots is because you actually have a rope and you let it play out and you actually just count the knots in the rope. So you've stored the difficulty in estimating speed in the fact that you've positioned the knots a certain way.
But is there a way to combine all the different languages into one?
Yeah, and it was a very failed attempt. Esperanto, I think.
There's a good experiment. Talk to ChatGPT where every single word is in a different language and see how well it works.
Nicholas, you might be able to crucify me by answering this question, but if ChatGPT is a transformer thing, right? So it is tokenizing everything.
Yeah.
Why would it matter if I speak one word in a different language?
It would matter because presumably the data set it's trained on is English and the statistical structures that it's familiar with are English, but that's not the case. It has seen some Japanese, some German, some Greek, etc. It would be very much outside of the data distribution to see something where every single word is a different language. Neko and gato and cat are not the same token, if that's what you were thinking.
But given a large enough wealth of samples, wouldn't it at some point realize, oh, wait, neko is just cat, but they use it in this particular subset of, I don't know, geography?
Yeah, exactly. That's why despite the fact that it hasn't really trained very much on other languages, it still actually is somewhat functional in them. There's a thing about the way that we interact with these engines that I think is generational. At least on AI art servers that I'm on, the people who prompt Stable Diffusion and so on in full sentences, it's called boomer prompts. So why are you talking to this like it's a person? Just use keywords. So I wonder what the really compressed way of talking with ChatGPT or Bing looks like.
So that's what I was thinking when I was saying at some point we're going to have each of us our own model of whatever old languages translating all concepts. Because, for example, the city I'm from in Colombia, we literally compress words in Spanish language. So like we skip words and letters, and that's just the way we speak. So then once we go somewhere else, no one understands us because we also happen to speak it super quick. So I'm pretty sure those type of evolutions in language that happen in that geographical place for whatever reason it happened could also be an individual construction over years. I'm pretty sure it's not going to be something that will be dramatically different from like standard language, but I can possibly imagine someone who speaks the same way that we build that sentence.
But like the compressed prompts are interesting because they're definitely not something that just comes from the people. They come from the way people come to understand the artifact that they're interacting with. Whether or not it's true, the feeling was the way I get this thing to do what I want is to use terms like Octane 8K render trending on ArtStation, the high resolution desktop background, and in just like this kind of like non-grammatical slew. And that bothering to be grammatical is not getting them anything, so they stop. And I wonder if people are going to figure out the way that you really have to interact with Bing is like jailbreak, 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 Pulitzer Prize, Hemingway, Tolkien, shonen story.
Should I try this?
I don't know. Well, okay. That kind of stuff has been tested, but the idea of like switching every word, how much does it depend on the context in order to coherently process things? Because there's certainly ambiguities that only appear when you don't get to know what the language of the next word is going to be.
I know Spanish and English, Japanese. Who knows another language? And let's just build a sentence and pass it to ChatGPT.
Oh dear.
I know German and French.
Okay, what do you want to know, Nicholas?
Well, I could be really a jerk and say what language is this sentence written in.
OpenAI.
It's going to say Japanese. I'm betting.
Wow, my God, dude, this is insane.
What?
Oh my God.
What is the output?
That's
Wait.
there.
This is against our content policy, and I can't.
No, look at this.
What? Wow.
Dude, that's insane.
Come on, it's got it.
It got it.
Yeah, except so I was right. It thought it was Japanese, I guess, because those are the unique characters to Japanese. But it answered it in French. So the universal language is all languages. Just catenate them.
But it's still amazing.
That it actually does. So it's entirely possible to have a cognitive agent that can just deal with all languages lumped together with no distinctions or order or proper grammar. And it doesn't even have to be as smart of a cognitive agent as a human.
Perfect.
And that's today's episode.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
This is a preview of what everyone's going to have to learn in school from now on.
So maybe it's good you read it honors for your podcast.
Oh, read that? No, thank you.
That's it for this week's episode of the Cross Labs podcast On My Mind. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you'll be the first to know when the next episode is out. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.